Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Wendy Kopp. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Teach for All, which is a global network of organizations, independent, locally led organizations in 61 countries and growing, that all share a common purpose of developing collective leadership to ensure all children fulfill their potential. We also are working towards a common vision, a vision that one day all children will have the education, support, and opportunity to shape a better future for themselves and all of us. And what we've seen during this pandemic era is new practices and mindsets emerge among educators all around the world that we think have the potential to accelerate progress towards that vision of students developing their leadership, their sense of agency and awareness and problem solving and critical thinking skills and all to be able to shape a better future for themselves and all of us. So while acknowledging how incredibly challenging this era has been, not only for teachers and our schools and school systems, but especially for the most marginalized students and families around the world, we also wanted to create space to consider the new possibilities that have emerged in this era that do have the potential to speed up progress towards this vision that we are all working towards. And so we have an amazing panel to help us consider this question and bring their insights from communities in different parts of the world. So I'm going to briefly introduce them and then we'll just get into the discussion. So first of all, we have Emmanuel Camuli, who teaches mathematics to 88 children, grade 4 and 40 grade 5 children at a government school in rural eastern Uganda. And he joined Teach for Uganda in 2019 after pursuing a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Chemistry from Makerere University in Kampala. Owen Drilla Sanyal, who is online, teaches English and Social Studies to 74 girls at a government school in Delhi. She joined Teach for India following her master's from the London School of Economics and Political Science. And Khadija Bakhtiar is the CEO and founder of Teach for Pakistan, which currently has 76 fellows teaching 3,000 students across high-need schools, public schools in rural areas around Islamabad, as well as hundreds of alumni, most of whom continue to work full-time to strengthen education and the supports around low-income children. So to get us started, can you each share, and maybe Emmanuel, we'll start with you, more about your experience during the pandemic and the biggest new practices and mindsets that you've seen that could improve education over the long term?
Thank you. Thank you, Wendy. So when the pandemic hit in my community without electricity and access to internet, it was upon the teachers to really innovate and see the children continue learning. So as a passionate educator, immediately I knew that I couldn't leave this to chance, and so I had to use what was available. So in my community, that deep down in rural Uganda, what was available was actually pen and paper. So immediately I started handwriting learning packets for mathematics for my learners so that they could keep learning, because I'm fully convinced that education is the only weapon that can get them out of poverty, which has existed for generations, and I want to see that happen. So the learning packets came on board, but given that now the context had changed, they would not answer the learning packets when I'm seeing them or when I'm supervising them. So I knew that now I had to empower them to support one another. So whoever would actually take a learning packet from me, I would encourage the elder brother or sister or anyone at home to actually support. So because I knew that in the process of actually attempting the learning packet, I knew they would get some challenges along the way. So to me as an educator who wants to achieve my goal at the end of the day, I knew that this was a time to actually bring in the peer-to-peer learning approach at another advanced scale. So that is one innovation I had to bring on board. And I think in going forward, we need to empower our learners to own their learning. So I'm thinking of a future where peer-to-peer learning is part of our routine. For example, I'm already thinking that maybe at the end of each week, the children are reflecting on how well they did the peer-to-peer learning, so that it is actually normal. It is not something that is done maybe only when there's a pandemic. Because when that happens, when peer-to-peer learning gets part of their routine, then we are making them own the learning.
I love it. Yes. So I'm hearing both fostering a different level of student ownership for their learning and fostering a sense of community responsibility for each other's learning.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
And I also know that you also started really leveraging higher forms of technology during this pandemic as well. Do you see that continuing?
Yes. So leaving aside the learning packets, I'm really concerned that my children should participate in the digital economy now and in the future. So to me, digital learning is more than simply even learning. It is introducing them to technology. And introducing them to technology means that they are acquiring some skills now, but they're also learning how to learn, which will be an important skill in the future. So on one side, I was issuing out the learning packets, but also on the other hand, I was figuring out how do I accord my learners access to technology. And in the process, I was able to partner with the student change makers in the US, and we got 29 tablets and 2 solar panels to power them. And the journey so far with the tablets is really amazing. One, it is new to the children, and so they love learning using the tablets. But also, I think the most important aspect is that I have discovered more how important the foundation skills in literacy and numeracy are so important if digital learning is to make sense. So in which case, I was able to identify gaps in the foundation skills, and immediately worked with my other colleagues to ensure that we conducted remedial lessons to equip the children with the foundation skills, so that now when they're using the tablets, they're actually learning at an accelerated speed, because I'm so certain and confident that if they can learn, poverty will be normal in that community.
Yeah. I think it's incredible to listen to your example and all of the ways in which this pandemic actually accelerated progress for you and your students. Owen Drilla, are you there? If so, I would love to hear about the new practices and mindsets that you've seen emerge in this era as well. Let's see if we can get her. Owen Drilla? No? Okay, we'll see if she comes back. So in the meantime, Khadija, I'm curious what you've seen from Teach for Pakistan.
Yeah, I think some things very similar to the incredible examples that Emmanuel was sharing. I think 3 kinds of mindsets that I've seen develop that feel really significant to me. And all 3 of them, I think, are things that even pre-pandemic, we used to talk about in our program when we were working with our teachers and we were training them. But the challenge of the pandemic kind of forced all of us as a community to bring these to life and operationalize them in a way that had never been required before. So I think the first one is this idea that the teacher is not the superhero in the room who's going to get in front of these kids and solve all of their problems magically by themselves, but they're really the facilitators of an entire ecosystem of learning. That includes other teachers in the school, that includes parents or older siblings like you were talking about in the community. And so I think the pandemic really, what we saw happening was forced our teachers to think about how do I take one step back on this big stage and invite all of these other actors to join with me in making sure that their kids, who they love just as much, can continue to learn. And they found that the second thing, I think, alongside of this, we talk a lot about how parents want the best for their kids, and this is a mindset that we're trying to change among, well, young people, especially in Pakistan. This belief that poor people perhaps don't care about their kids, and that's why their circumstances don't change. But in the pandemic, I think our teachers found that not only do parents care about their kids, they're actually incredibly resourceful. So when a teacher said to a parent, you know, I really want to start a WhatsApp classroom, but how can you get hold of a smartphone? Because it's a really expensive thing. And for a parent who's just lost their job in the middle of a pandemic, it seems impossible to kind of do that, make that happen. But parents went out and they made those kind of seemingly impossible things happen. So I think that was the kind of second mindset shift, that parents have a real significant role to play in continuing learning for their kids, not just in the pandemic, but kind of even after. And so I think the third one is a real deep sense of possibility that's really concrete. I think we talk about sense of possibility a lot, and when teachers are working in really challenging circumstances, they all need it. But for teachers to imagine, for kids who are on the other side of the digital divide and who have such poor access to digital infrastructure, for them to be able to imagine something that somebody like Emmanuel did, how are these kids going to learn the skills? How are they going to get the technology and the infrastructure to learn through Zoom or WhatsApp? Seemed really hard pre-pandemic. Now it seems like, yeah, we've got this. We can do this, and let's look at what's next.
So I'm hearing a few things. Teachers rethinking sort of their relationship with students actually in the learning process, and engaging them with still more ownership for their own learning and for each other's learning. Teachers better engaging parents and others in the community more deeply in the learning process, and just teachers with a greater sense of agency almost, that they can make anything happen. It sounds like, you know, you, like many other teachers around the world, although you're in such an unlikely context to have made it happen, have just gotten over the inertia around leveraging technology to make teaching and learning easier and more accessible. Something else I've heard all across our network is a greater focus on well-being, students' well-being and social emotional development. I don't know, have either of you seen that in your work?
Manu.
Thank you, Wendy. Is it working?
Is it working?
So I think one thing that is certain about our future is uncertainty. So, but when the pandemic came, I think everything I think the uncertainty became more clearer. So at that point, in my community, it was more than just issuing out the learning packets to my children, because one, they would honestly ask me and probably other elders that, okay, so shall we ever return to school? We are doing well, but shall we ever return to school? So such questions actually were actually confirming that they are mentally tortured to some extent. And so at that point, there was more I think I administered some counseling services to them to give them hope, to show them that yes, we have the pandemic now, but things will get better. So, and in the process, they would take the learning packets back home more happier.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, thank you for that. I think we now have Owendrilla. Owendrilla, it'd be so good to hear from you what practices and mindsets you've seen emerge in this era.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Really sorry for the glitch.
No worries.
So something that I noticed in my classroom was a lot of peer-to-peer learning that even Emmanuel talked about, where the kids sort of taught not only the younger classrooms but also their own community students, right? And that sort of led me to understand how teachers act as facilitators. So just like bringing in the whole ethos of student-teacher partnership, right? And that's something that we also work towards student leadership, I would say. Another interesting that I also sort of noticed during the pandemic was how the community sort of came into the picture. Because a lot of focus was on parental engagement at that point of time, right? Because kids were spending more and more time at home. So the whole idea around contextual learning, bringing in parents as part of, an active agents to their learning is what I also noticed. And that has definitely sort of pointed something that you also mentioned right now, Wendy, was the importance of socio-emotional learning to be included while we are teaching academic stuff, right? And how the whole understanding of socio-emotional learning then pans out, not only for the students but also the educators, I would like to say. And these are some of the learnings that I have, and I probably think we can continue even as we sort of navigate our ways around what the post-pandemic world can now look at.
Thank you so much. And while we have you, Andrila, another theme that I've heard across our network is just the extent to which in this era teachers have actually engaged students in leading today, in leading in their classrooms, in their schools, in their communities. And I wonder if you are still there, if you can share whether you've seen that, and I'd love to hear the same from you all.
Definitely. So I teach two grades, 9th and 10th, in a low-income community in Delhi. It's a government school. And something that we do a lot is cross-classroom and integrated learning. So we combine 2-3 subjects together and we teach. The idea then is to sort of, also impact the other classrooms that are non-TFI. And that is something that we experimented a lot. And since I'm a social sciences teacher, I also believe in a lot of experimental methods. So let's say very esoteric or very heavy topics like power sharing, or topics like democracy, right? Electoral politics. How do we sort of bring that alive in our classroom? The idea is to find out the fundamentals and then try to sort of utilize the context of their communities. So last year, what my kids did, my kids sort of conducted campaigns of their communities to learn these topics. So we had student bodies inside our classrooms to figure out what are the problems, let's say, the school is facing. It could be with regard to water. It could be regard to access. And then using these structural problems or using these structural knowledge to then impact their community is something that we've focused on. Something else, Wendy, we've also tried to do, of course, the pandemic has also shown how there's like a huge disjunct in the way that policy works, right? A huge disjunct in, let's say, the policy and implementation part of it. So what we did, the national education policy in India came about in 2020, right? And a lot of discussions were around how to make that policy implementable. And what we did, we sort of included more of student voices in my classroom. So a typical day could look like, we take up one particular policy piece from the national education policy around curriculum and pedagogy, right? And I propose the question to the students: if you were the director of education, how would you then implement that in your classroom and then your school? So these are some of the things we've used to put together, let's say, the learnings, because the pandemic has definitely shown how the world is evolving, right? And how to then sort of also integrate 21st century skills among the kids.
Thank you so much. And I happen to know from talking with Oentrilla earlier that she also goes so far as to have her students actually teach about half of the classes per week. And then they spend Friday debriefing all the lessons, where they give her feedback on the lessons she teaches and she gives them feedback on the lessons they teach, which is just another beautiful example, I think. What about you all? Have you seen kids getting more engaged in leading today in your communities?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so powerful listening to teachers. Two examples from Pakistan come to mind, I think, from our work. One, I think, is, when the pandemic first started, in the beginning, we started to try and reach our kids as quickly as we could. And as many of them as we could. And in the beginning, we were only able to reach about 50% of our kids with the fellows, with the teachers directly calling the students and their parents themselves. It was actually because of the student-led efforts in the communities that about 5 months into the pandemic, we were at reaching about 90% of our kids, because they were just going to each other's houses in their communities, canvassing, making sure that whoever we couldn't reach was reaching out to us directly. So I think that was an incredible example. And now what I'm seeing is, we're not in a post-pandemic world, of course. And as schools have started to reopen in Pakistan, one thing that we're seeing happen in schools is that corporal punishment is on the rise. And so what I'm seeing in some of the most exciting classrooms in which we work is teachers have worked with students to really develop their own voice so that they are able to say to the other teachers and the other kids who are involved in physical violence, no, this is not okay. We know what our rights are and standing up for them. And in one particular school where 3 of our teachers are placed and have been working with kids consistently, the incredible result that has come out of that is that students organized a protest, and the principal then responded by banning corporal punishment herself and ensuring that she's sitting in classrooms of teachers who are likely to beat kids and ensure that that doesn't happen. So that's just one example.
Amazing. I don't know if people, maybe some of this sounds small. I feel like there's something very profound about what we're seeing right now. I mean, we spend so much time talking about how schools and classrooms look exactly the same today as they looked 150 years ago. And yet, in this era, this 2-year period, we have actually seen some really significant shifts in the relationship between teachers and students, in the degree to which we're leveraging technology, in just how we're even viewing students as leaders who can go solve these problems in classrooms, who can teach classes, who can, change school level practices and such. So I think there's just something so important in this. I guess at the same time, we all know that this era has taken its toll on kids and their mental health and well-being, and on their kind of academic progress and all. And I'm wondering how you all are thinking about sort of the balance between sustaining some of these shifts, which could be so profound in speeding up progress towards a very different kind of education system, with the need to just meet immediate needs of students today. Like, how do you think about that? Emmanuel, you want to start us off?
Thank you. So when I think it is vital to note that the pandemic, with all its challenges, has some benefits to it, because if it were not for the pandemic, we wouldn't be having a learning revolution. I think most people don't see that there's a learning revolution, but I personally see there's a learning revolution already happening. For example, in my country, Uganda, before the pandemic, newspapers could be published every day, and for the entire week, there was no learning material in the newspapers. As I speak now, I think every day we are having learning materials in the newspapers, and all that is happening because the pandemic came. So if we come from the angle of people understanding the learning revolution that has been initiated by the pandemic, I think we can sustain the shifts. But in the context of my country, and maybe so many other countries in Africa and across the world, I think sustaining the shifts will necessitate that we are intentional in empowering the teachers with the digital skills. Because if the teachers don't, for example, get the skills, then they won't see, for example, the importance of using technology in learning. So like for me, I'm actually speaking about the shift of leveraging technology in learning. So for me, I think it will be sustained if we empower the teachers more. But also, in my community, in my school, I think no teacher and no one can stop the learning revolution using technology, because the children enjoy it in the sense that when there is a session for using the tablets, and then there are other normal lessons. But when the session for using the tablets comes, the children themselves approach the teacher. Teacher, it is time. We need to use the tablets. So they're interested in using the tablets. So, and when you give them the tablets, the moment you give any child in my school a tablet, they will set it up and they will start learning immediately. They're supposed to learn for 80 minutes every time they get a tablet. 40 minutes for mathematics, and then 40 minutes, which are followed by 40 minutes of English, and they are aware of what to do. So they're already owning their learning. But not only that, they're interested in using the tablet, so no one can stop them. So I think that shift can easily be sustained because the children are also empowered to demand for its usage.
So good to hear. Oendrilla, do you have thoughts on how we sustain these shifts, especially at this point where there's so many immediate needs among kids?
Yeah. Thanks, Wendy. So I think the first thing is just to accept that there needs to be a change in the way we understand the education landscape, which obviously means taking student voices into account because they are our direct beneficiaries. So why don't include them in the policy discussions, take feedback as to how we can improve the methodology, right? And another thing I also feel that we can sustain it by introducing socio-emotional learning in teacher training, right? Of course, the kids are at the forefront, but also teachers require that kind of understanding. So the entire weight should be on attracting more and more young population in the education landscape, not just as teachers, but as other, let's say, peripheral roles as well, right? Somebody who's interested in curriculum, somebody who's interested in the policy part of it. So just understanding that education should be on the agenda. And I think that's the way we can sustain it, right? And that's how we can sort of qualitatively impact the civic society. I think that's what I would say we'd be able to sustain. Yeah.
Thank you, Khadija.
Yes, actually, when you ask that question, it makes me think, I think that both of those things, sustaining these kind of shifts and working towards what kids need today, I think working towards both those things, it's the same direction. I think it is by sustaining these shifts that we will meet our kids where they are today and take them into the kind of future that we still imagine for them. I think about the very real mass learning loss that we're seeing in Pakistan, of course, but all over the world. And it makes me think about the fact that students have become more independent learners through the pandemic because they've had to be, is a necessary part of the bucket of solutions that we will have to bring to work if we're going to help overcome that learning loss, right? So that's one example. To my mind, I think the real danger is calling off our own kind of warning signals on this too early. And as schools and school systems are opening back up, thinking, going back into our comfort zones and thinking, oh, the pandemic is over, the crisis is over, right? And reminding ourselves actually the crisis is just starting. I think I'm starting to see that happen a little bit in Pakistan, where it feels like at a policy level, we're already kind of ready to move on to the next kind of debate or issue in education, even though there's so much research coming out about the learning loss. So I think a little bit to what Alendra was saying, how do we keep this on the agenda as a burning issue, I think.
Yeah. I think we may have time for a couple of questions, if any of you have them for our panelists. Did I see a hand back there?
Thank you, and congratulations on this panel. I think, Wendy, that this is Emmanuel, Khadija, and Orinda are proof of concept for Teach for All, and right in their own. I'm curious from each of you, what do you feel like has been your biggest personal breakthrough during your career with Teach for All? And maybe, if you want to, what do you think is the biggest challenge as a change maker that you face?
Oendrilla, I'm just going to tell you the question because I'm not sure if you could hear it. It was what's your, and of all the panelists, kind of what's been your biggest breakthrough and maybe your biggest challenge through your Teach for All or career? Did I get that right? Do you want to give that a shot, Emmanuel? What was your biggest breakthrough in your Teach for Uganda career? And what was the biggest challenge, would you say, for you personally? And Oendrilla, if you're ready to come in, do.
Yes. I am there. Yeah. Should I go on, Wendy?
Yes, do.
So I think one of the most important breakthroughs would definitely be the community that we have, right? Something that got highlighted during the pandemic as well. And when I say community, the ecosystem of support, not just with regard to Teach for India, which I represent, but also the wider global community. Whenever we've sort of, had requirements with regard to our project, we've also done cross-country, exchange programs for our kids. I think the global community has always been there. And I think just finding that particular community, being a part of it has definitely been the breakthrough. And if I had to sort of figure out the challenge, it would definitely be, so when I joined the fellowship, I had a lot of ideas in my mind that I would want to do this for my kids. I would want to do that for my students. But the shift that came as to what I want to do, as opposed to what they actually need, was definitely the challenge, right? And just finding our way around access. I think these are two things that I would feel is like pivotal to my journey with Teach for India as well as the Teach for All network.
Thank you for that. Do you have thoughts, Emmanuel?
Thank you. In the communities where we work, I think the biggest challenge is changing the mindsets of the parents and the children themselves to invest more in their learning. So from the start, I would feel it together with my colleague. I would feel it that, okay, I'm talking about people investing more in their education, but they really don't see the importance of it. And the reason they don't see the importance of it was simple. They don't have role models, if I'm to say. And that was the biggest challenge, because unless we have their minds on board to invest in education, then all other things were not going to work. So from our trainings, we had been actually helped to know how to engage the community and the parents. So, and I can say that the greatest breakthrough was that within about a month, that had actually changed. How did it change? We conducted weekly home visits, talking to the parents, interacting with them. But then we also initiated a culture of having monthly parents' meetings. And the purpose of all this was to actually change this mindset by showing the different examples, maybe from other contexts. And in the process, I think within a month, we were already having a school feeding program in my school, because now the parents were willing to invest. So, and I think for the first time, you would see that children were actually coming to school earlier, because now they had known the importance of actually learning. So the biggest challenge, changing the mindset, and then the biggest breakthrough is that at the end of the day, the minds were changed and they were more involved in their learning.
Beautiful. Do you want to?
Yeah, thank you. And I think the biggest breakthrough in my journey with Teach for All so far has been, and it's been really humbling, I think, for me to realize this, is, this work is necessarily about people. It happens through people. I think very often when we talk about system change, I think it's just easy to forget that. We talk about rewriting textbooks, we talk about building infrastructure, but we don't often talk about what will it take to change how people think and how they operate. And I think that what I've seen is when you start that conversation with people who are, for instance, in government and in positions of power and influence, I think the big breakthrough is being able to make that connection and have that idea translate and see the spark go off in their eyes where they're like, yeah, that we've been trying to find the vocabulary to talk exactly about that. That I think is the most exciting thing.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
Hi, thank you for this inspiring stories. My question is, when you talk to people outside of school, right, to tell them about what you're doing, to maybe get them interested so maybe they can help, what are the stories, what are the words that you say to them what are the messages that really land? What do they listen to? And when they listen, they say, "Oh yes, okay, I'll get involved. I'll help you teachers. I'll help the school, etc."
So I get your question that, in other words, you're asking, why is our work important as Teach for All? Am I getting you right?
Yeah, pretty much. What do you say
Okay.
that gets people engaged to help you with school? To people
Yes,
outside of school, maybe to government officials or to parents, maybe to local business people.
So I think to that I will say that brilliance is evenly distributed, actually. So we have a situation where we have these learners who are actually having potential, but then the conditions there cannot enable them to actually thrive. So our work is to go to their communities, to their schools, and create an enabling environment. So we are sure that if we create that enabling environment, then they will thrive. And what would happen in the long run, they will solve their own problems. So our work matters because we are creating an enabling environment for the learners where it was not there, where it wasn't, such that they will thrive in the classroom and beyond, and in the long run solve their own problems.
Yes, beautiful. I'm going to let you all on the panel have the last word here. Just, I guess, and I'll start, but just what are you leaving this discussion thinking? I'm leaving this discussion thinking that there is so much discussion about learning loss and about all that we've lost in the pandemic out there in the world and in our education communities. And I'm just thinking how different the discussion is when we ask a different question, which is, you know, what have we gained? Like, what are the new possibilities that have emerged that could actually contribute to a more effective and equitable system? And I wonder what would happen if that was the question we were asking communities and educators all over the world.
Yeah, and I'll say, I think what's coming to me honestly is, and the answer to that question should be coming from our teachers and our children, instead of all the education experts.
Brilliant. Owen Drilla, do you have a last thought?
I think I'll completely agree with you, Khadija and Wendy, that the question now is what were the innovations that this crisis sort of gave us, and how we can sort of include the beneficiaries in the conversation, right? Wonder what that would lead to when we have discussions with the beneficiaries taking this forward. Yeah, right, the parents, the students, and especially the teachers per se. Why don't we include them in the conversation? So yeah.
Beautiful. Emmanuel?
Thank you. I think the pandemic has showed us that that learning can no longer be contained in the classroom. It's because of the pandemic that we've been able to look at the different ways people can learn. The print media, Zoom, all those things were not heard of before the pandemic. So my last words would be that we need to embrace all the ways of learning so that we have accelerated learning. But we can no longer leave to chance the issue of our teachers having the digital skills. So I think we need more startups empowering teachers with the digital skills so that they are able to give what they have.
Beautiful. So I'm hearing that if we ask what we're learning and what new possibilities are emerging, and we first and foremost ask that of students and parents and of teachers and of those closest to the answers to that question, we may just, in fact, mark these moments as the day when the true learning revolution that Emmanuel talked about earlier actually starts. So excited to see where all of this takes us. Thank you, all of you panelists.